Hello chess family, it's me National Master Jesse James, and today we're taking a look at rule number 25. When you're ahead one pawn, trade pieces, not pawns. Now this is a very important rule, especially if you don't know your endgame as well as you should. The basic idea, we're going to be trading pieces, not pawns. What does that mean? Well, when we're talking about trading pieces, we're talking about the big ones, of course. We're talking about your knights, bishops, your queens, your rooks. And basically, the reason why we're doing this and not trading pawns is because whenever you finally transpose into your winning king and pawn endgames, which is the easiest endgames to win, you want to keep as many pawns on the board as possible because each pawn is a potential queen. So the more pawns that you trade, the less likely you will actually be able to get a new queen. So trade your big pieces, not the pawns. Let's take a look at a beautiful example of an endgame here with Morphy. Morphy's going to be playing with the white pieces against Seguin over here. So we're going to go ahead and start off with e4, e5, knight f3, d6, the Philidor's defense. Pawn to d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4. I always like my knights in the center. Knight f6 attacks the pawn, knight c3 defends the pawn, bishop to e7, and now a nice move here, bishop to d3. I will champion this move by saying I do like this move better than some other people like to play bishop c4, which is very aggressive, but the bishop's not very well placed here because, well, once this is taken, f7 is a really strong square here for black because the rook and the king are going to be defending it pretty soon. Bishop d3, I like this played a lot more, is because h7 is the weakest pawn next to the king whenever it's castled, and that's where the bishop's going to be aiming at. So black goes ahead and castles, and now a very nice move here for white, pawn to f4 right away. Now why does Morphy play f4 here right away rather than go ahead and castling? It's because he knows his opponent's next move is going to be this pawn move of c5, and the best square for this knight to go to is going to be f3. And here you see we'll lose the right to actually push our f4 pawn up right away. And why do we want to push the f4 pawn up right away? Well, the f4 pawn is going to give us some extra space and also allow the rook to enter the game in case it's needed. So, of course, as I said, black goes ahead and plays this pawn to c5, knight back to f3, knight c6, and now let's get our king to safety and castle. The next piece black wants to move is the bishop over here. It's the final minor piece to be played, develop with the threat. Bishop g4 gets played. What's the next piece white wants to move? Remember, always be thinking about these things. Bishop's going to come out. Where's the best square for it? Bishop to e3. And black plays an interesting move here, pawn a6. What is black's idea with this move? It may seem like it's just trying to stop maybe white from bringing out the knight or bishop over here, but here, plans of queenside expansion. Black wants to play pawn to b5, and now you see that there's some really annoying moves here with either pawn to b4 getting played, kicking the knight, or even pawn c4 kicking it away. Best is not to let your opponent expand and create counterplay. Keep them underneath your thumb. You don't want them creating problems for you. So, best way to stop a pawn is to use a pawn. What do we play here? Simple chess. Let's go ahead and play pawn to a4. Alright, pawn h6 gets played. Now this one is not really a useful move. So let's go ahead and play our own good move, pawn to h3. It's funny how pawn h6 was bad, but pawn h3 is good. Well, h3 is going to go ahead and question this bishop, what it's up to. Also, if you even take it to the next level of thinking, I wanted to develop my queen next so I could connect my rooks, which is one of the next plans for me. And, well, I was trying to find a good square for the queen to move to. So this h3 move asks the bishop, if you are going to trade, you can at least let me develop my queen with a free tempo. And that's exactly what happens here. Bishop takes on f3, queen takes on f3, so I don't lose a tempo here. So this h3 move is a very fine one. Black goes ahead and plays knight to b4. Unfortunately for us, we're going to be losing our light square bishop because, well, we can't move it away because the knight will take the pawn on c2 for free. So let's go on to our next idea. We need to keep developing our pieces. What do we play here? Well, our f rook's looking pretty good. This a rook is not doing too much work over here. So where's the best place for this rook? Should we go to d1 or e1? Hopefully you found the right square. Let's put our rook to d1. It's always a good idea to put your rook opposite of your opponent's queen. And there's already ideas like e5 here, which will get the pawn out the way, so the rook really will be attacking the queen. Okay, black saw this, of course, and plays queen c7. Not only does he develop to get out of the threat, but he makes his own threat. What is black's idea here? Here he's starting to win a pawn. All right, what was the threat here? Black wants to play pawn c4, kicking away the bishop, so when the bishop moves away to its only free square, bishop to e2, well, we can just snack attack and take this pawn on c2 here. So, simple chess. We know our opponent's idea. Let's stop it. What do we play here? Ah, simple chess. Pawn to b3, stopping this idea. Knight takes on d3. Black wants to go ahead and take away the bishop pair from white. A very smart idea. And, well, here's a good question. Should we take back with the pawn here or the rook? Definitely one of these is better than the other one. Which one would you play? Again, throughout my videos, feel free to push stop and analyze and see what the best move is. All right, let's take a look. In the game, Morphy goes ahead and plays c takes d3 here. A lot of people would choose rook takes d3, which technically would be a good positional move. Why is this a good positional move? Well, right now Black has one of the weaknesses in the game, a pawn weakness to be exact. What is the pawn weakness? Can you pinpoint it? It's the d6 pawn. This is a backwards pawn right here. It can't be moved forward without being captured. So rook takes d3 makes a lot of sense because we're putting pressure on the pawn. The problem with this is that, well, Black has a nice counter move, full points. If you chose rook takes d3 and you didn't know why it was wrong, it was because of this move right here, pawn to c4. This is a very annoying move because, well, if we take and queen takes, well, now we see that white now has two isolated pawns on the queen side, and Black is going to be very happy for this. There's targets for you to attack. Rather, if you try to move the rook away, well, after pawn takes, now the queen's attacking the knight, and also the pawn's threatened to win another pawn. So this is why we don't want to play this rook takes d3. Here we have to play the anti-positional move, although it's best because of the threat. Pawn takes on d3. So obviously c4 can't get played anymore. All right, Black keeps moving forward. Rook to e8, keep developing. And a nice move here for Morphy. Controls the center. Let's start pushing our opponent back. Pawn to d4. Now here's a very nice move. Keeping moving forward and keep making threats. Here I would love to play something like d5 and e5 in the future, and you can just imagine how beautiful these pawns would look. But, well, Black has their own ideas. Queen to c6. Here it's so hard for me to not play d5 here, but Morphy sees a better way to play. Mind you, if d5 does get played here for a tempo off the queen, queen c7 guarding e5. Now this is important. If the queen went somewhere else, let's just say bad chess, they go ahead and play queen to b6. Here we have something like pawn to e5 attacking the knight. And if pawn takes, well, this is a very strong center and a strong game here for white. Oof, Black is definitely going to be lost here pretty fast. With that being said, is this forced? Of course not. With the good move here of Black, seeing that e5 is the weak square, Black should definitely look about playing queen to c7 guarding this. Now, White still has a good position here, but it's going to take a while to control this square, especially when you consider Black playing a nice move like rook f8, and now maybe even double up the rooks here. This can get a little bit annoying. Morphy finds a good way to go into a winning endgame. Maybe winning is too strong a word to say, although against his opponent, it definitely was winning, but definitely get an advantage to go into a good endgame here. Here, Morphy sees a very nice way to play forward. Can you spot it? Push pause. See if you can find what to play here to force a good endgame here for white. All right, hopefully you found it. Here we're going to be playing a very nice force move. Pawn takes on c5. Well, if they don't take back, they're just losing. Pawn takes, and this is the move you need to spot, knowing you're going into a good endgame. Pawn to e5 here. Notice the double attack. The pawn's attacking the knight, and also the queen's attacking the queen. Here, Black is pretty much forced to trade. If you try to move your knight away, which, by the way, there are no good squares, if knight to d7, this loses really fast. Knight h7 is safer. I guess, quick tactics time. White to move and win a piece here. What do you play? Simple chess. We want to win the knight here with the rook, but the queen's defending. We'll simply just trade queens here, giving double pawns, and then embarrass them more by winning a piece. And this is pretty much the main idea of this. If you don't trade your queens, well, I'll trade and give you some weak double pawns. So, Black is pretty much all but forced to do this. And the only good square for the knight to move to, well, you're going to have to go to h7 here. So, queen takes queen first. Rook takes, of course. We don't want to double our pawns. Knight to h7 here. And now to grab the advantage as much as possible, what do we play? Rook to d7. Remember, rooks like being on the 2nd or on the 7th rank, depending on which perspective you're at. Here, the rook is very well placed as it's now attacking a lot of the pawns. It's lined up to attack the pawns. And also note, whenever you're using your rook to attack pawns, always attack them from behind. Now, this is even when you're guarding your pawns, you want to guard them from behind. So remember, rooks like being behind past pawns or pawns in general. So rook d7 gets played, attacking the b7 pawn. Black plays rook to b8. And here, let's keep adding to this position. Remember, when you have them on the run, keep them on the run. what do we do now? Knight to d5, putting the knight to a beautiful square, and of course threatening the bishop right here on e7. The bishop had to retreat. Bishop to f8. And now, what do we do to keep moving forward in this position? Remember, get all your pieces active. There's one piece in particular that's not helping, which is the rook on f3. Come up with an idea. How do you get the rook into the game? Also, make a target. Every time you're in a position, it's always good to have a target so you can keep your pieces flowing or moving toward this weakness. What's the weakness in this position? Hopefully you spotted it. It's the c5 pawn. So how do we get our rook over here to attack on c5? What do we do? Well, there's two ways to do this. You can go 1, 2 moves to do it. But here Morphy plays a different route, which I do like. Bishop to f2, allowing the rook to slide over right away. Now, I do like this idea. Mind you, it's probably just as good as the other way, but I always like the way Morphy does things. So, bishop f2 gets played. Rook to d8, a very good move here for black. Remember, guys, when you are in a losing position or your opponent's putting lots of pressure on you, you should look to make trades. And this is exactly the idea that black does. Now, if we trade right away, this would be very bad for white because now, well, this rook's looking very well placed, attacking the knight, and now the rook has access to the only open file here. The only open file is the only way in and out to attack and defend. Okay, so what is white to do then? I can't move my rook away because then it'll take the knight. Calculate. What do we do here? Always look to make threats. Here, a very nice move, knight to b6. Not only does it move out the way, but even allows the knight to defend the rook. And well, you should not take this rook. Unfortunately for black, rook takes on d7, knight takes, and now we see a nice triple fork here. Bishop, rook, and pawn. And here, particularly, we're attacking the c5 pawn. All right, black to move. Of course, rook c8 should get played, or else the c5 pawn does fall. All right, let's keep adding pressure. What do we play next? Of course, rook to c3. c5 is now being attacked again. And unfortunately for black, there is no good way to defend this pawn. All right, what happens next? Black has to make the best of it. Rook c7, and of course we're going to take here on c5. Here, very nice way of doing this. Bishops are definitely a bit better in endgames than knights in this position. Why? When you look at the pawn structure, you see that there's pawns on two sides of the board. There's one pawn island, and then there's two pawn islands. Black has it over here, and over here also. So why are bishops better? Bishops can move back and forth easily, while the knights, well, they have to jump back and forth. They can go over to one side of the board with one move. Knights will typically take 2 to 3 moves. So, knight, nice move here. Knight takes on f8. Knight takes on f8. And how should we take here? Should we take with the rook or should we take with the bishop? Here, rook and bishop endgame is definitely better than rook and knight, at least as far as they pair up. So should we take with the bishop? Should we take with the rook? Remember, when you're winning, trade pieces, not pawns. Rook takes on c5, looking to make more and more trades here. All right, well, black is pretty much forced to trade. If you try to play something like, let's say, rook to d7, pin it and win it. And this is going to be very hard for black to stop. So, rook takes, bishop takes, knight to e6 attacking the bishop. All right, the knight's also attacking on f4, so simple chess. Bishop goes back to e3. Pawn to g6, a nice move here as well. It's now the endgame time. It's time to start pushing forward. Here, where will the passed pawn be made? Is it going to be made on the queen side, or is it going to be made on the king side? These are constant things you should be asking yourself when you're playing your games. Well, hopefully you figured it out. Not too hard. If you ever want to know where the best place to make your passed pawn, it's simple. Count the pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4 here on the king side. Black has 1, 2, 3. Well, if you trade off these 3 for these 3, that leaves a passed pawn. Most likely this will be the passed pawn as there's no pawn in front of it. All right. So g6 got played to stop f5, which is going to start pushing forward and grabbing more space. Let's go ahead and make that threat again of f5. g4 threatening f5 and also gaining space. Knight to d8. And now, for the final piece to enter the game, what should white be doing next? Well, hopefully you know it. One of the strongest pieces going to enter the game. It's the king. Now, we know the king is going to be entering the game, but the real question is, where does the king move to, and where's its best place? Very simple. The king belongs in the center, so it can either go king side or it can go queen side. And here there's a particular square that we want to get control over. If the king gets to either d4 or d5, this is the best place. d4 is good for equality. d5 pushes the advantage. How do we know that? Remember, 5 and back, this is black's territory. From 4 and back, this is white's territory. When the king gets to d5 or even d6 or d7, even better, again, you can go either queen side or you can go king side. Let's see how far up we can get here. So we start off easily. King to f2, knight c6, king e2, and now a nice idea here by black, pawn to b5. What's the idea? Well, let's go ahead and make a trade here as this makes the pawns weaker. Pawn takes, king to d3. You can see now black has set up a nice blockade here. The c4 and a4 square taken up by the pawn, and the knight controls b4 and d4, which only leaves one way to get in, which is the e4 square. But you see here, white's going to be able to penetrate this pretty nicely. Alright, so king to d3 gets played. King to f8. Bishop c5 check. A very nice move here. This is just technique. If it was up to black, he would probably go king e7, e6 to get to the center faster. Unfortunately for him, well, when we play bishop c5 check, we're stopping that idea from happening. So, king e8, and let's keep bringing this king up forward. King e4, king d7, king d5. Our king has now got to its best place, and now we need to continue pushing. But where do we push? Well, black goes ahead and plays knight d8. How do you continue making progress here? Of course, we talked about it earlier. We're going to start pushing on the king side. We got 4 pawns, they got 3, which means we're going to be able to make a passed pawn. Now, right now, black is saying, I want to play knight to e6. Well, even if the knight wasn't going to e6, I'd want to play pawn to f5 anywhere. Remember, move your pawns forward on a phalanx or on the diagonal. So, f5, here we go. G takes, everything's simplifying, and again, white's pushing black backwards. Okay, black plays h5. Not a bad move. Remember, because we have the dark square bishop here for white, black wants to keep the pawns on the light square so the bishop can't attack it. Alright, what do we do here? What are the easiest endgames to win? King and pawn endgames. What do we play? Bishop to b6 attacking the knight. And unfortunately, the knight is pretty much conquered. This also allows the king to get closer to c5 to get to b5, the pawn on b5 here. What's better than one passed pawn? 2 passed pawns. We're going to create one over here, but we can also get this one across the board too. So, knight to b7 got played. Pawn to e6 check. Pawn takes. King to e7. Here, there's many moves to win. If you can, just choose one way or one path that you would do it. What would you do here? What would I do? I'm not going to lie, I would not play the way Morphy plays. I would most likely go ahead and play bishop c5 check. I believe this should win pretty easily. Well, if they take, the endgame is pretty simple here. King takes b5. My king will go to a6, and we'll just push this pawn forward. There should not be any good ways for this king to stop us. Oof. It does look a little dicey here, but worst case scenario, I can even run my king over here. But I don't think that'll be necessary. If king b6... Oh, actually, I think we're on tempo here for this to happen, because I studied my Dovedetsky endgame. Remember, guys, typically it's always best to lead with your king and not your pawn. But I had this position memorized already. But with that being said, in the game, what happened? Morphy chooses an even easier path to win. He just goes ahead and plays king to c6, forking the knight and the pawn. And the knight really has nowhere good to go to. The knight had to retreat to d8, and the simplest endgame to win, or bishop, or king and pawn. So we simply just trade. King takes, and Morphy gets his pawn across the board, using the exact same kind of technique that I used earlier. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this game. Remember, whenever you're up a pawn, trade pieces, not pawns, so you can get to this winning king and pawn endgames. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next one.